Hello students, today we will be discussing the topic Statehood and Sub-Regional Movements, a study of the Jharkhand, Uttarakhand and Chhattisgarh movement. The objective behind today's discussion is to give you an understanding of the concept of sub-regionalism, the reasons behind the emergence of sub-regional movements in India, as well as the study of the Jharkhand, Uttarakhand and the Chhattisgarh movements as sub-regional movements. For the convenience of our understanding, the entire discussion has been divided into a number of segments. We will start off with the concept of sub-regionalism, then we will try to understand constitution and sub-regionalism. Thirdly, we will focus on how the Indian state has tried to accommodate sub-regional aspirations. We would move on with sub-regional identities and statehood, and then a case study of the Jharkhand movement, Uttarakhand movement and the Chhattisgarh movement. Now, we have already studied the meaning of regionalism. To recapitulate, regionalism in the Indian context generally refers to the assertion of distinct ethnic, linguistic or economic interest by various groups within the country. Sub-regional movements refer to sub-state groups in heterogeneous multi-ethnic states set apart by self-conscious and self-ascribed cultural and other characteristics which are politically mobilized to address collective grievances against the state. When frustrated in their quest for recognition and resources, they generally challenge the very political and territorial definition of the state and the demand self-determination. Over the years, our government has reorganized its territories to integrate the different identities. First, through linguistic reorganization of provinces. Second, through reorganization of the different states in Northeast on the basis of tribal identity. And more recently on the basis of ethno-regionalism by creating sub-states within the main state. Now, what is sub-regionalism? Sub-regionalism can also be called to be intra-regionalism. Intra-regionalism refers a struggle on the part of some ethnic identities within a state to achieve autonomy within the same state. This is largely the result of a deep sense of deprivation and marginalization or exploitation and uneven economic development of the area as compared to other regions of the state. The distinctive factor of this form of identity assertion, as distinguished from other forms of self-determination movements carried out in the country since independence, is that these regional groups do not demand secession from the state or creation of a separate new state, but they rather demand a state within the existing one for their economic development. So, it is state within a state. Now, how does the constitution accommodate such ethno-regional identities? With independence, the framers of the constitution faced the upheaval task of consolidating the territorially truncated country characterized by enormous diversity into a single unified state. After deliberating for nearly 2 years and 11 months, the Constituent Assembly drafted a constitution that provided for a union of states. The constitution envisages the creation of a layered territorial and administrative order, but said little about the kind of federal units the Indian Union was to have, or the basis on which they would be created, say whether geography, demography, administrative convenience, language or culture. The decision was left entirely to the wisdom of the Parliament. Nor did the constitution envisage the provinces or states to have their separate constitutions, as for the case that we have in USA. Now, the constitution has tried to address the issue of sub-regional identities in a unique way. Let us try to understand Article 2 of the Constitution, which provided that Parliament may by law admit into the Union or establish new states on such terms and conditions as it thinks fit. Article 3 states that Parliament may by law form a new state by separation of territory from any state or by uniting two or more states or parts of states. It may increase the area of the state, diminish the area of any state, alter the boundaries of any state and alter the name of any state. The provisions of Article 2 suggest that there are no specific criteria for the creation of statehood in India. Statehood may be created on different criterions within the pluralistic Indian society. Secondly, Article 2 and 3 explicitly empowered the centre to redraw the state boundaries according to the needs of time, creating a powerful centre. Now, how did the Constituent Assembly try to address the sub-regional demands? There were intense debates in the Constituent Assembly as to whether the consent of the affected states from where a state will be carved out should be taken or not. Now, Professor K.T. Shah, one of the eminent members of the Constituent Assembly, opined that during reorganization of territories, the view of the affected people should be taken either by direct referendum or at least by the legislature of the state concerned, since the essence of democracy implies that nothing should be imposed from above. Professor Pandit Hidaynath Kunzru, another member, maintained that for alteration of state boundaries, consent of the state should not be a necessary identity or identifier. In fact, consultation with them should be quite enough. So, to Hidaynath Kunzru, we need not take the consent of the affected states. All these deliberations resulted in Article 3 of the Constitution, which assigns the responsibility for federalizing of India to the centre without indicating any specific criteria for grant of statehood, sub-statehood, ultimately leaving everything to the wisdom of the future Parliament. If we go by the experience of the last few decades, recapitulating the various statehood movements, it appears that the reorganization of internal territories was more the result of people's movements than the centre's use of exclusive power of uniting or breaking territories. Now, this is well illustrated in the speech of former Home Minister L.K. Advani while he was speaking on the floor of the Rajya Sabha during the discussion of the Madhya Pradesh Reorganization Bill in 2000. I quote Honorable Advani. In 1950, we had three categories of states, Part A, B and C. Thereafter, the states were reorganized on the basis of language mainly. As a result, several big states, particularly the Hindi-speaking states like Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh and Bihar, were created. The development of these states were imbalanced. For this reason and also for some other factors, there have been several demands for creating new states in the country. We have decided that we would support creation of only that new state in regard to which the local people make a demand and the concerned state legislature passes a resolution favouring the creation of a new state. Only 3 states passed such resolution: Uttar Pradesh for the creation of Uttarakhand, Madhya Pradesh for Chhattisgarh and Bihar for Jharkhand. Keeping in view of our decision, we committed ourselves to the creation of these 3 states and included this issue in our election manifesto. I hope if, like the other house, this house passes the bill with consensus, 17.5 million people of the Chhattisgarh region will only be too happy. The pertinent point, students, is that identity is definitely important, but simultaneously development of the region should also be recognized as an important factor. Although the then BJP-led union government advocated the 3 states were created to ensure proper development and administration of the areas, nevertheless the issues were not so simple. Jharkhand, Uttarakhand and Chhattisgarh may have been similar in their nature of backwardness, yet each had a unique history, identity and method of expressing their grievances against their respective governments. And this requires students an individual study as to their historical background, the basis of identity, method of attaining statehood and lessons from them. Let us start first by the Jharkhand movement. And how did the Jharkhand movement result in the creation of the state of Jharkhand? Jharkhand was popularly hailed as the land of forests and renowned for its rich reserve of resources, and is in fact equally rich in its cultural mosaic. It is the home to over 20 tribes. Prime among them are the Munda, Santhal, Ho and the Kharia tribe. The genesis of the creation of an independent state of Jharkhand can be traced to the later half of the 18th century, when the British, in a bid to consolidate their position in the country, passed a number of legislations which virtually isolated the Adivasis from rest of India. The Permanent Settlement of 1793, the Sale and Rent Law of 1869 witnessed the transfer of land to non-tribals, the practice of begar, that is forced labour, exploitation by moneylenders and zamindars who acted as agents of the British aggravated the miseries of the Adivasis. Discontentment among the exploited masses of the region triggered off a series of revolts. The most important being the Malar Revolt 1772, the Tilak Majhi Revolt, the Tamar Revolt, the Coal Insurrection, the Ho Revolt, the Great Coal Insurrection, the Santhal Revolt, the Birsa Revolt. All these movements were brutally suppressed by an iron hand. The Adivasis, in order to further their cause, formed the Chota Nagpur Unnati Samaj in 1915 with the objective of providing employment to the tribals and the formation of a separate state for the tribals. The Adivasi Mahasabha was formed in the year 1938. The main aim of the Mahasabha was to promote inter-tribal unity in the region, which would work for improving the socio-economic conditions of the tribals. However, the Mahasabha failed to bring about inter-tribal unity, and this led to the formation of the Jharkhand Party, which declared representing ethnic interests and fighting for a separate Jharkhand state within the Indian Union. Now, the question of a separate Jharkhand state was raised, but the States Reorganization Commission rejected it on a number of grounds. The tribal population and the tribes were divided into separate and several language groups. The separation of South Bihar, according to SRC, would affect the economy of the existing state, upset the balance of agriculture, industry and education, and leave the North and South Bihar poorer areas. The arrangement of the 5th schedule of the Indian Constitution seemed quite fair and satisfactory. Special development votes for the Chota Nagpur and Santhal Pargana division of Bihar should be set up according to the SRC instead of giving them a separate state. Now, discontented with the recommendation of the SRC, in 1954, Jaipal Singh of Jharkhand Party drew the attention of the parliament to the extreme impoverished condition of the tribal people of Chota Nagpur and Santhal Pargana and raised the issue of a separate Jharkhand state, which in his opinion would help to put an end to the economic deprivation of the people of this region, as they would be able to make their own future if they were granted autonomy through a separate state. Initially, the leaders of the movement wanted 16 districts of South Bihar's Chota Nagpur and Santhal Pargana regions for the new states. All these districts were tribal dominated. On the question of a separate state, the tribal organizations such as the Hul Jharkhand, Birsa Seva Dal and non-tribal groups like the Mahatos and the Shivaji Samaj forged an alliance which gave birth to a new political party in 1972, which was called the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha. The Jharkhand Mukti Morcha assumed a militant character and took resort to violent measures to curb the increasing exploitation by the moneylenders in the region. The JMM also brought about various innovative development in the region. It created collective farming and collective cattle breeding, established a grain bank, brought about improved methods of cultivation and irrigation projects. Thus, it launched a massive campaign against the existing social and cultural evils that had plagued the tribal society of the Adivasis. It felt that the creation of a separate state of Jharkhand comprising the Adivasi areas of Bihar would lead to the development of the region as well as its people. The Jharkhand movement had initially started off as a tribal movement, but with the decrease in tribal population, and if you just look into the tribal population, how it has declined from 30.26 in 1981 to 28.71% in 1991, the movement assumed a regional character. The movement for a creation of a separate state for Jharkhand was endorsed and supported not just by tribals but also by non-tribals, peasants, workers, migrants from other areas, thereby making it a regional movement, a movement where the identity base was quite complex and it did not revolve around a single identity marker. Giving recognition to the need for self-rule, to the tribals, to their economic and cultural development, Jharkhand was officially recognized as a state of the Indian Union carved out of Bihar in the year 2000. The creation of Jharkhand is considered to be great attainment of the tribal people of the Chota Nagpur and Santhal Pargana who have been agitating for a separate state of their own since independence. Let us now move on to the Uttarakhand movement and what were the issues involved in the Uttarakhand movement for a separate hill state of Uttarakhand. Basically, the Uttarakhand agitation is unique because there were three major factors which played a very important role in the Uttarakhand movement. These three factors were ecology, caste reservations and economic development. Let us start with the first reason, how ecology formed a base for the demand for a separate state. The key issues pertaining to the hill people of Uttaranchal area revolved around the daily livelihood which they got from nature. Most importantly, the Coolie Uttar movement in Kumaon, the peasant rebellions, the Dhandaks, in the colonial period, the anti-liquor movement and the very well-known and popular Chipko movement served as the basis for the Uttaranchal movement in Uttar Pradesh. It was a different movement where ecology, environment, nature played an important role because people's livelihood were dependent on nature. The people of the Uttaranchal Himalaya region were heavily dependent on the forest as their main source of livelihood. Over time, continuous encroachment from the plain people for these products alienated the hillmen from the forests. The State Forest Department to continue to neglect the interest and needs of the Uttaranchal people. The local people were deprived of the basic source of livelihood, and despite knowing that the forests were the chief source of sustenance, the government did nothing to prevent the encroachment from outsiders. This led to agitation by the hill people. The second reason was caste reservation. Politicization of caste identities in the post-Mandal period served to ignite the sub-regional movement in the Uttaranchal area. It was the extension of the 27% reservation quota for OBCs to the Uttarakhand region in Uttar Pradesh that sparked off the agitation for a separate state in mid-1994 and strengthened the regional identity of the hill people. In July 1994, a mass movement began in the 8 hill districts of Uttar Pradesh against the imposition of 27% reservation for the other backward classes for a separate state of Uttarakhand. It was contended that since the hills of the Uttarakhand comprise only 2 to 3% of OBCs, providing 27% reservation for OBC in addition to the existing reservation system would imply denial of government jobs and education to the hillmen. In the absence of almost any significant secondary or tertiary sector employment, locally government posts provided the bulk of salaried employment in the region and therefore they were highly priced. As a consequence, agitation started for the removal of 27% reservation in jobs. Even the Uttarakhand Kranti Dal, which was formed in the year 1979 for a separate hill state, started rigorous movement by taking recourse to the leader's strategy of fast unto death to ensure the fulfillment of their demands. Eventually, the issue of reservation became subsumed beneath the very powerful demand for statehood that swept through Garhwal and the Kumaon region. The reasoning was that a new state would be free to set its own OBC quota and caste lists of who would be eligible and who would be ineligible. Perhaps most importantly, not only would reservation quotas be more sensibly calculated But a host of other benefits would follow, mainly because a separate state would allow development policies to be designed, planned and administered for and within the hills. The third most important issue in the Uttarakhand movement was economic development. Since the late 1990s, the anti-reservation movement was overshadowed by the hill people's agitation for proper economic development. The issue of statehood was now raised on two major principles. One, development of underdevelopment and peripheralization of the periphery. The main grievance which formed the basis of the protest movement in the mid and late 1990s was that economic and developmental marginalization of the hill area is due to the fact that plain-based planners in the distant state capital of Lucknow are unable as well as unwilling to understand the development needs of the hill population, their environment and their economy. Only a separate hill state would help them to resolve the regional problem and at the same time consolidate the different sub-regions within Uttarakhand who have distinct identities of their own. This would give the people of Garhwal, Kumaon, Jaunsar Bhawar, Terai and the Doon Valley their independent identities. Different territorial units created since independence were organized around some particular identity marker. But in the case of Uttarakhand, a number of factors triggered off the call for statehood. The ecological factor was combined with the economic factor to promote a state within a state. The different political parties, especially the BJP, the Janata Dal, the Samajwadi Party, the Bahujan Samaj Party included the demand for a new state of Uttarakhand in their election manifestos. However, two national parties, the CPIM and the Congress I, opposed the creation of a new Himalayan state on the apprehension that redrawing of state boundaries would open the floodgates for more and more such demands for regional mobilization. Despite such opposition, anti-reservation and the claim of a separate state of Uttarakhand became reflected in public opinion, and to fight for common cause of all the regional political parties united under the common banner called the Uttarakhand Samyukt Sangharsh Samiti, which can be translated as the Uttarakhand United Struggle Association. The States Reorganization Act of 2000 led to the creation of a separate hill state of Uttarakhand carved out of Uttar Pradesh. Let us move on to the last case study, Chhattisgarh. Historians do not concur regarding the etymological meaning of the term Chhattisgarh. There is a tradition saying that ages ago, about the time of Jarasandha, 36 families of Dalits, leather workers, emigrated southwards from Jarasandha's kingdom and established themselves into a country which after them was called Chhattisgarh. In ancient days, the state of Chhattisgarh was ruled by 36 small kings. These kingdoms had their own small capitalized forts, which were called garhs. And on the account that there were 36 garhs, the region came to be known as Chhattisgarh. There is another story behind the nomenclature of Chhattisgarh. It said that Chhattisgarh is the corrupted form of the word Chhattisgarh, the capital of the Chedi dynasty, popularly known as the Kalchuri dynasty. Now, given the variety of stories and folklore behind the nomenclature of Chhattisgarh, history corroborates the fact that though India came under the suzerainty of the British with the grant of Diwani by Shah Alam II, the region of Chhattisgarh was independent and ruled by Marathas. It was only in 1818 that the region fell to the British, and in 1854 the province of Chhattisgarh became a deputy commissionership with its headquarters at Raipur. Nevertheless, being a predominantly tribal area, the people of the region has vehemently protested against the outsiders, especially the British, for interfering in their traditional culture and way of life. Throughout the 18th, 19th and early 20th century, their tribals spearheaded a number of rebellions in order to fight for their cause against the British exploitative system as well as exploitation by the moneylenders and local zamindars. The commonalities of all these rebellions were that these rebellions were focused and asserted the traditionally inalienable right of the tribals on local resources, land and forest. Chhattisgarh, being a tribal region, is inhabited by the Gonds, Muria, Bhumja, Kawars, Halbas, Boiga and Kanars and other tribal communities. The demand for a separate state of Chhattisgarh, highlighting the distinct identity of the tribals and their indiscriminate exploitation, for the first time was raised in the year 1924 by the Raipur Congress unit, and later on it was discussed in the annual session of the Indian National Congress held at Tripuri. When the States Reorganization Commission was set up in 1953 in order to deal with the feasibility of the creation of linguistic states, the demand for a separate Chhattisgarh was also put forward, but it was not accepted on the ground that the prosperity of Chhattisgarh would compensate for the poverty of other regions of Madhya Pradesh. Being frustrated with the denial of statehood, a new set of demands was placed in the Nagpur Assembly of the then state of Madhya Bharat. In the year 1955 and thereafter, several protest movements in furtherance of a separate state of Chhattisgarh was raised from time to time. The Chhattisgarh Rajya Nirman Manch, a political forum under the leadership of late Chadulal Chandrakar, organized several rallies with the support of the major political parties, especially the Congress and the BJP. The demand for Chhattisgarh gained a new momentum in the 1990s when this movement coincided with the statehood movements of Jharkhand and Uttarakhand. The Chhattisgarh Rajya Sangharsh Morcha was formed in May 1999 to fulfill the aspirations of the people of the region. Both the Congress and BJP supported the movement and made it a major issue in the 1998 parliamentary and Madhya Pradesh Vidhan Sabha elections. The Madhya Pradesh Reorganization Act of 2000 provided for the separate state of Chhattisgarh consisting of 16 districts of erstwhile state of Madhya Pradesh. Now, for Chhattisgarh, there was no single and lone issue which led to the creation of Chhattisgarh state. Rather, it was a result of an intricate intertwining of an amalgamation of factors that paved the way for a separate state. The people of the region felt that Chhattisgarh had a distinct socio-cultural entity which distinguished it from other areas of Madhya Pradesh. The people of the region also felt that they were relatively deprived because the developmental requirements were not met by the state of Madhya Pradesh. Therefore, only a new state would cater to the development needs of the people of the Chhattisgarh region. The distinctiveness of the Chhattisgarh movement was that it was not carried out or confined to a particular segment of the society, rather it cut across regions, caste, classes and political parties. On the basis of the study of these three movements, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh and Uttarakhand, what can we deduce so far? These three movements marked a departure from earlier statehood movements because in each of these three cases, the Adivasis' main discontentment was directed against their very own state government for neglecting the region in terms of economic development, unlike earlier statehood movements which was targeted towards the center. A state cannot be integrated unless it integrates the different nationalities by fulfilling their aspirations and preventing the marginalization by the majorities. Some scholars argue that the root cause of all these movements lie in the shrinking capacity of the Indian state, underdevelopment, politicization of the plural peripheral identities together with the search for power by new elites at the margins. These have snapped the inter-ethnic and intercultural bonds that have so far drawn them together. The different states, or rather the sub-states that were formed because of the sub-regional movement, say Jharkhand carved out of Bihar, Uttarakhand carved out of Uttar Pradesh and Chhattisgarh carved out of Madhya Pradesh, reflect the possibility of fulfillment of different ethnic demands to the continuous process of accommodation of ethno-regional identities that has started since the 1950s. Thus, this process of accommodation of different ethno-regional identities is not yet over, but this is considered to be a work in progress. Thank you.